Welcome, one and all, to another episode of PACIFIC414 Episode Reviews. I am your host, Mike, and in this episode, you're not just getting one episode review, you're getting two episode reviews. Why? Because this is the way, and I have spoken. So, in this episode review, I'm going to be reviewing Mandalorian episodes, Chapter 7, Episode 7, The Reckoning, and Chapter 8, Episode 8, The Redemption. So, this episode starts off with Greef Karga sending a transmission to our Mandalorian friend, offering him another gig. Because why? Because things have run rampant since the last time our Mandalorian friend was there, and the Client and his Imperial forces have increased. They've increased because of what happened last time on Navarro with our Mandalorian friend taking the child, the Mandalorians coming to his rescue, and the Mandalorian leaving Navarro before heading to Sequoia. So, the Mandalorian listens to the transmission, looks at the baby, and, he's contemplating whether he should do it. Well, of course, we know he's going to end up doing it because next we see the Razor Crest is back on Sequoia, and Mandalorian's looking for none other than Cara Dune, who's sparring with an alien in the tavern that we saw in Episode 4, The Sanctuary. And this time they're linked by an electric harness, and they're sparring back and forth. The alien and Cara Dune are throwing punches and kicks. Well, mainly Cara Dune throwing the kicks, and Cara Dune does get the best of this alien and gets her reward. So, next we see, after Cara Dune and the Mandalorian make eye contact, is the three being the child, Cara Dune, and the Mandalorian, talking about what's going on. It's mainly Cara Dune and the Mandalorian that are talking. The baby's just sitting there at the table looking cute. And so Cara Dune is being briefed on this proposition by Greef Karga, and Cara Dune reluctantly accepts, and next we see Cara Dune and the Mandalorian are back on the Razor Crest, heading back to Navarro, and Cara Dune still wants to know if Greef Karga wants to bet her. Basically, with Cara Dune being an ex-rebel drop trooper, she knows that there's a heavy price on her head. She knows that even if she shows up, that's right for anyone to execute her since she's on their wanted list. And the Mandalorian says that Grief Karga doesn't even know that she's coming. So Cara Dune and the Mandalorian do a little arm wrestling, and the baby's there watching, and he thinks that the Mandalorian's in trouble, so he begins to force choke Cara Dune, and the Mandalorian quickly reacts and says, "No, no, no, she's my friend. Cara is my friend." So he manages to get the baby to stop, and Cara Dune says, "This thing, what he's doing isn't right. You know, this thing needs to be controlled." Of course, what happened before, which I forgot to mention, was while the Mandalorian and Cara Dune were talking, and Cara Dune was wondering if Grief Karga aims to bet her, basically use her as bait because she is wanted by several systems. What I failed to mention was the fact that they left Baby Yoda all alone on the flight deck, and that the Razor Crest starts shaking when they're having their discussion, so they go to the flight deck. The Mandalorian hits some controls, engages the autopilot, and that's when we next see the three of them in the armory after Cara Dune is able to look at all the different weapons that the Mandalorian has in his arsenal. The Mandalorian is under threat because he manages to get Baby Yoda to stop, the child to stop, whatever you want to call the infant. And Cara Dune says, "Do you know anyone who can watch this thing?" So we go back and we meet up with our Ugnut friend. And the Ugnut says, "I feel that you're in trouble." And he basically knows, because why else would the Mandalorian return, that the Mandalorian needs help. So as he's being told what's going on, in walks IG-11, and of course the Mandalorian quickly gets to his feet, along with Cara Dune quickly getting to her feet. They're pointing their blasters at it, and our Ugnut friend tells the Mandalorian that the IG-11 unit is not a threat. It's been reprogrammed, repurposed, and the reason for that is because our Ugnut friend, whose name is Quill, found the IG-11 unit where the Mandalorian shot him and found little Baby Yoda back in episode 2. He was able to rebuild and repair the damaged systems, retrain IG-11, and basically give it the skills that he felt it needed, its life of operations. So after being reassured that the IG-11 unit will not harm the infant, Quill does offer to add another protocol to the droid to be a nurse droid to watch over the infant. But Quill also has his terms that he wants the Mandalorian to accept, and that's that the three of them, along with IG-11, go, but they have to take 3 blurgs with them, which the Mandalorian reluctantly agrees with. And Cara Dune even points out the fact in the episode that the Mandalorian has a theme for droids, and he says, "I have a theme for that droid," meaning he doesn't trust droids. And we'll learn later on in the episode why he doesn't trust droids. And the 3 of them, they all get on the Razor Crest. They're headed to Navarro, and they're discussing what's going on. And of course, they're looking at the baby's cradle that he's lying in, and having all sorts of different discussions, like each other's backstories as far as Cara Dune's background and the Ugnut's background, or Quill. And Cara Dune doesn't trust the Ugnut Quill because he served the Imperial Empire, and Quill says he served a life of servitude to the Empire because he was sold into slavery, and he bought his freedom by the use of his hands. And because he's crafty and able to weld and fix things, he manages to construct a new device for the child that's even better than the one that he currently has. So the three of them head to Navarro. They land the Razor Crest at the meeting site where you see Grief Karga and three other bounty hunters awaiting their arrival. Three of them offload on the blurgs, that being the Mandalorian, Quill, and Cara Dune, along with little baby Yoda and his hovering cradle, or stroller, whatever you want to call the device. And Grief Karga gives them the rundown of, what's been going on Navarro. And he's also introduced to Quill and Cara Dune, and they agree to start heading into town, but before they do that, they have to camp out for the night. So, while camping out for the night, they come under attack by these flying creatures. And these flying creatures are hell-bent on getting their nighttime dinner. So they attack Cara Dune, Grief Karga, the Mandalorian, Quill, and little baby Yoda. Of course, is crying, whimpering, and the Mandalorian does engage glass covers. That's what I'm going to call them on his cradle. And after he does that, you see one of the bounty hunters are killed, Grief Karga is injured, and we later find out that with the injury, because the claws got his arm, that the claws also injected a poison into his arm. So Grief Karga's moaning and groaning, saying, I'm fine. And of course, Cara Dune is saying that the poison's spreading and asking if anybody has any med packs. And then little baby Yoda starts wallowing over to Grief Karga, and Grief Karga says he's going to eat me. And little baby Yoda places his hand on the forearm of Grief Karga and begins to heal him. So that leads to the next morning. The next morning, they're all getting ready to head into town, and you have Grief Karga and his two remaining bounty hunters that are still alive until Grief Karga kills him. He kills him because he had a change of heart after little baby Yoda healed his arm and cured him of the poison. Why? Because the original plan was to bring in the Mandalorian to the client at his compound and kill the Mandalorian. Of course, Grief Karga had a change of heart. They all agreed to go into town, except for Quill and little baby Yoda. Quill and little baby Yoda are heading back to the Razor Crest, while Cara Dune, Grief Karga, and the Mandalorian head back into the main town. And of course, Quill does remind Cara Dune to cover her tattoos, because that will alert the attention of the Imperials that are in this town. And they all go in their separate directions. You see the Mandalorian, Grief Karga, Cara Dune walking in one direction, and little baby Yoda looking at them while they're walking in that direction, as Quill holds him, walking back toward the Razor Crest, ready to get back onto the blurg. So we finally arrive to town, where you see a stormtrooper on a speeder bike asking for their identification or chain code, and the stormtrooper says, I'll give you 50 credits for the helmet. And Grief Karga says, no, are you kidding? This helmet's going on my wall. And of course the Mandalorian quips softly, on your wall. And then Grief Karga says, just go with it. And so they head into town. They go into the bar where the client and the other stormtroopers are. And of course, before they even get there, Cara Dune does remark the fact that there are more than 4 stormtroopers in Navarro, which they were told by Grief Karga there were only 4, but as you could see, and as was mentioned in the episode, the Imperial forces increased once the Mandalorian left with the child. So they get into the bar. The client gets up and he sees the baby, carrier, but he doesn't know that the baby's not in it. And he sees the Mandalorian, and he starts, being all nice to the Mandalorian, saying Beskar is beautiful, especially when it's forged by his ancestral forgers, and he offers a libation to Grief Karga, which Grief Karga takes, and the droid behind the bar prepares it, and in the meantime, we get a transmission from a Moff. Moff Gideon contacts the client and says, do they have the child? And of course, the client thinks the child's in the baby carrier, but guess what? He's not. Moff Gideon knows that the child's not in there. And what happens next is there's a bunch of blaster fire. Cara Dune, Grief Karga, and the Mandalorian go for cover, while the client and the droids and anyone else in there, including stormtroopers, are shot and killed. And next we see is a troop transport come into town, offload more stormtroopers before a TIE fighter lands, and out comes Moff Gideon. And he knows the history of the Mandalorian, Grief Karga, and Cara Dune. And he wants the child. And of course he gives them an ultimatum. You produce the child, or I can kill you. And of course, to add a little bit more pressure to their current dilemma, he mentions a weapon that was used during a mission in the final days of the war between the Rebel Alliance and the Imperial Empire, called an E-Web weapon. Sorry about that. And Cara Dune knows all about this E-Web weapon because it took out a majority of drop troopers in the final days of the war. So they're given an ultimatum. Of course, they're looking for a way out, and they do manage to move some furniture, and there's a grate behind the wall after the Mandalorian mentions that the Mandalorians who are left do have a hideout in the sewers, and they try to blast this grate open, which they can't do it because it's not working. So the Mandalorian raises Quill on the comm and asks him if he's at Razor Crest yet, and of course Quill is not at the Razor Crest yet, and this transmission is intercepted by the stormtroopers on speeder bikes, and they go after Quill on the Berg with little baby Yoda. Unfortunately, they kill Quill, snatch up baby Yoda, and start heading back into town, which leads us to Redemption, Episode 8. So in Redemption, what we see is we see Moff Gideon, still waiting on the answer from our three friends, and those three friends do manage to engage in a firefight, and the Mandalorian does manage to grab the E-Web weapon and take out a few stormtroopers before Moff Gideon shoots the power generator for the E-Web and causes it to explode, and it does injure the Mandalorian. And Cara Dune retrieves the Mandalorian, drags him all the way back into the compound, and she keeps reassuring the Mandalorian that everything's going to be alright, and the Mandalorian knows things aren't going to be alright. And of course, I've already gone ahead and skipped a few parts, but in brief, before that even happens, you have the two stormtroopers who went after our friend Quill and killed him and snatched up baby Yoda. They're waiting on orders to bring the baby to Moff Gideon, and of course the baby starts whimpering, moving around in the sack that one stormtrooper has him in. That stormtrooper hits him. The other stormtrooper wants to see it, and there's banter back and forth. Why do you want to see it? What's the moth going to do with it? Is he going to display it on a wall? Eat it? I don't know. But anyways, while that's happening, IG-11 comes, and of course the two troopers comment about how IG units are hunter droids, but this particular one's been reprogrammed as a nurse droid when it announces that it's a nurse droid. And IG-11 takes them out, takes the speeder bike, goes into town, blasts away, and that partly leads up to where the Mandalorian is dragged back into the compound, and Cara Dune, tells him it's going to be alright until she puts her hand around his neck and then moves her hand and reveals that there's blood on her hand. And of course, I know I'm going all over the place with this, but just bear with it. But anyways, Grief Karga says, to the IG unit, can you get us out of here? And of course the IG unit does manage to cut the grate and help them get out. Of course, that is before, a flame trooper goes in with his flame torch and shoots a flame toward Cara Dune, Baby Yoda, Grief Karga, and the Mandalorian, and also IG-11. And of course, Baby Yoda uses his force abilities once again to push the flame back to the trooper, and they manage to hightail it into the sewers without the Mandalorian and IG-11. So, the reason why they're going into the sewers is because our Mandalorian friend, who, by the way, Moff Gideon, I didn't mention this before, but Moff Gideon knows his actual name. His actual name would be Din Djarin. But IG-11 goes to remove our Mandalorian friend's helmet, and the Mandalorian protests because nobody's supposed to see a Mandalorian without their helmet, which, some might argue that wasn't the case before, and any Star Wars material that we've seen prior to the Mandalorian. But I would suspect that the reason why this came about is because, since the Mandalorians are almost extinct, they want to keep their identities secret from anyone who may be looking to hunt them down. So, IG-11 uses a healing spray, basically, peroxide, an H-gene type of spray or the Actus spray, as he refers it as in the episode, to heal the wound on his head. And they eventually meet up with Cara Dune, Baby Yoda, and Grief Karga in the sewers. After they do say, and they being Cara Dune and Grief Karga, they don't know their way around, and neither does the Mandalorian. He has only entered the compound from another area. And of course, as they're walking, they see the Beskar and helmets of Mandalorians who fell all piled up. But there is still one Mandalorian left, and that Mandalorian is the armor. And she gives him the backstory as to what happened. Those Mandalorians who fell, their armor is left behind, and it's going to be forged into new armor, new weapons. She doesn't say that, but that's what ends up happening later on when the armor forges a symbol for Din Djarin and the little Baby Yoda, and she also gives him his jetpack. So just like in episode 2 where the Mandalorian says, I gotta get me one of those, well, he's got himself one of those, and he has some training, but he doesn't have full training as far as using the rocket pack. But next we see, after the Mandalorian and everybody leaves, is you have stormtroopers going up to the armor and saying, "Hey, Mando, where are they?" And of course, the armor with her hammer and a few other weapons at her disposal manages to take out these stormtroopers, while the Mandalorian, Greef Karga, Cara Dune, and Baby Yoda find this lava boat, and there's a droid that they think is deactivated on it. Of course, they've got to get it pushed off and going down the lava river, and it's not budging. Cara Dune even tries her Gatling blaster. It manages to give them the leverage that they need. So they get on board the riverboat, and the droid on board this riverboat activates, doesn't listen to any commands when they're going downriver, and they notice that there are stormtroopers by using Mando's infrared camera, and then IG-11 hands over little Baby Yoda over to Cara Dune and is willing to sacrifice himself by using his manufacturer's protocol, and he goes into the river. Of course, Mando tells him no, but he's told by IG-11 he must follow this protocol, and he goes down river arming his bomb. Once he gets to the end of the river with all the stormtroopers surrounding him, and he proceeds to explode, killing each and every one of the stormtroopers that were awaiting him, giving Greef Karga, Cara Dune, the Mandalorian, and Baby Yoda a chance to live. But Moff Gideon's not done yet. Moff Gideon comes around on the TIE Fighter, starts blasting our heroes, and of course doesn't hit them, but our Mandalorian friend straps on his rocket pack, uses his grappling hook to hook himself onto the TIE Fighter. Of course, he's flying, wailing about as Moff Gideon's trying to get him off the TIE Fighter. Our Mandalorian friend manages to climb onto the TIE Fighter, uses a detonator that he magnetizes onto this TIE Fighter, causing the TIE Fighter to fall out of the sky after it explodes. And last we see is a meeting between Greef Karga, Cara Dune, and the Mandalorian, along with little Baby Yoda, saying their goodbyes, and Din Djarin, the Mandalorian, flying away with little Baby Yoda, reminiscent to a flashback scene that we see in the episode of when B2 battle droid was about to kill Din Djarin, and the Mandalorians rescued him, and Din Djarin's carried off by a Mandalorian. The final shot, final scene that we see in this episode is a blade, a saber blade, coming through the hull of the downed TIE Fighter and cutting an opening, and out emerges Moff Gideon holding the dark saber. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the dark saber, it was used by the one and only Mandalorian who was a Jedi in the days of the Old Republic. And how Moff Gideon got his hands on it, we don't know. Where has it been since the last time we saw it? And for anyone who knows, it was first seen in the series Star Wars The Clone Wars, and then followed up in Star Wars Rebels. So, where has it been since the last time we see it, and how did the Empire gain control of it? After all, we know that the last time anyone saw it, it was in the hands of Bo-Katan, and she was deemed the new leader of Mandalore after her sister was killed. So, we'll probably find out in Season 2 how Moff Gideon got its hands on the Darksaber, how the Empire itself got its hands on the Darksaber. Yes, I do know that the Empire took control of Mandalore, and they did mass executions and mass genocide. So hopefully we find out what happened and how the Empire gained control of the Darksaber, and any other surprises that are in store for Season 2, which has been rumored to be coming out in October sometime. So, overall, not just with this episode, but with all 8 episodes in general, I really enjoyed this series for the most part. Yeah, there were 2 episodes, Episode 5 and Episode 6. Episode 5, The Gunslinger, and Episode 6, The Prisoner, which weren't my favorites, but I've already said why they weren't my favorites in previous Pacific 414 episode reviews. So I'm not going to delve into that again. But overall, I do like the series. I'll be honest, I like it better than Star Trek Picard. And I'll get to that, and it's not going to be an episode by episode review. I'm just going to do an entire series review, but that's going to be in a separate video. But I'm just going to say it right now. I liked it a lot better than Star Trek Picard. And I'm a big Star Trek fan. So, anyhow, that's my review for Episode 7, The Reckoning, and Episode 8, The Redemption of Mandalorian. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I know it's longer than the previous ones, but I want to do a combined episode before I do an overall series review instead of an episode review of Star Trek Picard. So, hope you all have a great day, great week, and great night, and I will see you all later. Take care, everyone.